Today on the Career Q, we are speaking with Alex Wright. Alex is a development coach with more than 15 years' experience of leading Fortune 100 companies and coaching senior leaders in their worldwide companies. Today we're talking with Alex about what to do when you get frustrated or disillusioned on your job.
This is the Career Q, the podcast focused on helping you navigate the signals in your career to keep you growing and moving forward in business and in life. Here's today's host, Danna Redmond.
Welcome to the Career Q, Alex.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to jump into this topic as I know for a lot of folks, this can be a place where they get with their job is, they're just frustrated or they're not excited about it anymore. So this will be a meaty topic for us, I'm sure.
All right, let's go.
So, someone starts on a new job and they are excited about that new opportunity and the possibilities. But then, a few months in, they realize the role isn't really what they expect. So where do they go from there?
Well, I don't get a lot of people who are new in the role or new to the job. I work with a lot of senior leaders. I work with a lot of executives. However, I do see this a lot where people come into the job and they've been recruited with a bunch of really flashy brochures that make it look a lot more like a resort or a health spa than a place of business. And a couple of months later, 1, 2, 3 months later, they wonder what they've gotten themselves into and they don't know where to go. So when that does happen, and again, I haven't had a lot of professional engagements at that level, but I have talked to a lot of people. It's very unfortunate. It happens way too frequently. And so what it needs to happen is the people need to check in with themselves and do what I call they have to do some unpacking. So we got to settle into where that discomfort is. What is it that's really bothering them? And for a lot of people, that's a lot of work. It takes a lot of self-awareness. Very often people are telling them stories in order to alleviate some personal pain, right? If a person just left a high-paying job and they went to another job where they're not doing the work that was promised to them and they're getting a little bit disillusioned, that's very painful. Mm-hmm. And so people will mask that pain by telling them stories like, oh, this is temporary, it's going to get better, maybe I misunderstood what they told me. And so we have to start with some self-awareness and strip all that veneer off and basically initiate a crucial or a fierce conversation. And we have to ask the people to unpack what's really bothering them. And even a conversation that sounds simple like that, the person has an expectation we're going to start off in one place and they think they know how it's going to end. And by the time we get to that conversation, it's something entirely different. So that kind of sets the table for the discussion. It's impossible to know what you need to talk about until you've had that conversation. Usually what happens is after a discussion like that, we get some clarity on what the person needs to address, and that usually requires some kind of a follow-up with their immediate manager. They need to talk about the disconnect that took place and what they're looking for. And that takes a lot of courage. Here you got a brand new person in their job. They want to be liked. They want to be loved. And at the 3-month mark, to go into your manager and say, I feel like I've been sold a bill of goods. This job is not what was promised me when I was recruited, is for a lot of people a big step, especially if they've got a mortgage or they like things like healthcare or eating. They don't want to threaten their employment. So that's a big step for a lot of people, and they usually don't get there overnight. It usually is a process of at least several weeks, or very often it's many months. That's not a conversation people go into easily. Does that begin to tell the story of the 3-month disillusionment?
Yeah. I mean, I think it does, right? And as you mentioned, that can be a very scary thing. Most people have left something else that was paying the bills, or maybe even something else that they really enjoyed, thinking that this new opportunity was going to be bigger, better, more satisfying in some way. And that's the reason they were willing to do it. But then to have to realize whoa, maybe it's not what I didn't know what I was getting myself into. It's not what I expected. I love how you talked about that. It really does take some courage to do that, to really look at that. So what are ways that you would recommend that people can, really evaluate their current work setting to know if something needs to be changed and or what needs to be changed in that setting?
It could either be changes on behalf of the person who finds himself in the environment, or it can be changes in the environment, or it could even be a change in role. So again, until I have that conversation with somebody, it's impossible to know which is the right route. And again, that's all based on the premise that the person I'm talking to is able to see through the stories they've told themselves. And that's a challenge in itself. Usually what I try to do is I get people to talk about the experience that they want some insight on, and I ask them to elaborate on it. And what I'm looking for as they're telling me the story is incongruencies. A person might say something to me like, yeah, Alex, this part of my job is really exciting. Well, they don't sound excited when they're telling me that. And so there's an incongruence there. When I sense that somebody's story has holes in it, or where I sense that the tone or the way they're delivering the story to me is incongruent with the message, that's where there's something that I call turbulence. And I want to drill down into that turbulence and unpack it and find out, okay, well, you didn't sound very excited when you said that. What's behind that? And then they will say things like, well, I really enjoy the exercise, but the people I have to work with are very challenging. And then you ask them, what do you mean by challenging? And you find out that there are a whole bunch of personality conflicts. And none of this information ever comes out in a first pass conversation. It only comes out through discussion, people getting comfortable talking. Sometimes it takes multiple sessions to get to that point. And usually along the way, several times as the coach, I have to check in with the person I'm talking to, find out if they're comfortable with the discussion we're having. At some places, I might even want to offer a little bit of feedback. At those points, I want to ask permission, something along the lines of, would you mind if I offered some advice in this situation? Some people don't want to hear anything. Some people are welcome to it. So along this, already we're just on a short road. We're talking, first couple of visits talking to somebody. There are multiple times where we're checking in with each other, and sometimes that comfort has to take place before people will really get to the root cause of what their issue is.
That's so interesting to hear, sort of just even the length of time that it can take for somebody to really to be able to maybe articulate what it is, or, to be ready to address it, that, it doesn't happen. It's not like, oh, I'm dissatisfied with my job and, oh, here's my answer right away. Like, I've started this process and in a day I know, right, like what I should change. That's interesting to hear.
Well, people do have that expectation. And usually in one of my first meetings, I talk to people about the process and how it will take some time. Danna, people spend a whole lifetime with themselves, and they don't even have the self-awareness to give themselves truthful answers, let alone some guy who shows up and says, "Hi, I'm your coach."
Right. I mean, that's an interesting space to be in, I'm sure, for you as a coach to help reflect back, not exactly what somebody's saying, but really more what they're feeling and thinking and drilling into that. And as I love the word you talked about, is unpacking that.
Definitely one of the keys. You've got to know when somebody's not just pulling your leg, but they're pulling their own leg.
Yeah, and unpacking really is this great visual for me of, somebody having to sort of really dig into themselves and figure out where is that dissatisfaction or frustration coming from. And really, some of it might be from the fact that they'd left something else, right? And did they make a mistake, right? So maybe there's some of that guilt or some of those other emotions bound up in this if it's not this dream thing they thought it was. That's, has sort of nothing maybe to do with the new job. It's just some other guilt or other feelings that they're bringing with them.
Absolutely. I don't want to face the fact that I've left a perfectly good job. I've landed at a position where the environment is toxic, and I've got bills to pay and obligations to meet, and I don't want to face how bad it is here. That's a difficult nut to crack.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Alex, let's take a break. And then when we come back, I want to talk about more about how can somebody know, when a change is needed? What are some signs they can look for?
Thanks for listening. Be sure to check out the show notes at thecareerq.com, where you can also subscribe to the podcast and sign up for our newsletter.
Welcome back. We're talking with Alex Wright today about what to do when you're frustrated or disillusioned on your job. Before the break, we'd been talking a lot about how to unpack your emotions or unpack the details of the situation. So now I want to talk a little bit more about how can somebody know when a change is needed? Like, what are the signals that you would recommend somebody look for to know that maybe a change is needed or they need to start this unpacking process?
Well, it's very much an internal feeling. Usually the people who reach out to me have begun to feel some sort of dissatisfaction, lack of contentment. I usually don't have to tell people about the signs because they felt them and they're reaching out and they're looking for somebody to help explain it. But basically what it boils down to is people are dissatisfied. I always say all people want at their job is an opportunity to be successful. Usually it's a culmination of obstacles that are put in front of them to prevent that success that makes people unhappy. I think people could do just about anything if they knew they'd be successful and rewarded and recognized at the end of it. But again, it's usually roadblocks. It's going to be people who are difficult to work with. It's going to be a manager who asks you to deliver a piece of work with insufficient budget or not enough time. When people realize that they're in a situation where they can't win, they start to remove themselves from the situation. They disconnect emotionally with what's going on. It leaves people feeling kind of dead inside. All of those things add up to a person who just is not happy to go to work every day. And those are the kinds of conditions that put people in front of me that want to talk about what kind of options do they have.
And so how do you help somebody, or what is your advice for somebody that is at that crossroads of they know something needs to change, but they just don't know what needs to change? Where do people go from there?
Well, if they don't have access to a coach, people can keep a journal. The beautiful thing about a journal is once you write it down, it doesn't change. If people are imagining in their heads they've gotten a new job, they're very dissatisfied with what they're doing, and they make up little stories in their head to appease them and make them stay because they want to keep working so they can keep paying the rent. When they reflect back on that Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday, all of the details that they put in their head are all fluid, and they can just keep changing them to basically help them from feeling the pain and realizing they made a mistake and they're at a bad place. If they are writing those things down and documenting, and they read back a couple of days later, they can see, God, I was really mad at what this guy did. I was very upset with how that meeting went or how the people behaved in the meeting. And you can't cheat what you write down. I think the first coach that I personally utilized, he had an 8-week program, and at the end of his 8-week program, he gave the people who worked through the program with him, he gave them all a leather-bound journal, and that was his advice, and it still holds up today. Log the way you're feeling every day. Be as honest as you can with yourself about it, and read back over time to get an honest assessment of where you're at. If that doesn't work, there's a number of books that you can get. People can get books on how to understand your values, and you can find out if your values are congruent with the work you're doing. I find that is a really common issue, is that people start a job with a certain set of values. Over time, the requirements of the job change, and before you know it, the person is doing things that aren't part of their value set. They're starting to resent the company they're with, and they're not sure why. And it's really their fault because they look the other way. It's kind of the death by 1,000 cuts.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You need to stay in touch with yourself, and that's just good life advice. Stay in touch with yourself. Know the stories that you're telling yourself when you are altering the stories to make yourself feel better. There are books like Turning Your Mind into an Ally. It's a book about awareness meditation, and it's kind of how to get control of your brain and not let it run rampant. You see somebody might sit down to do their checkbook, and they suddenly see that their account is low on funds. And while they're sitting there, they start to spin a story of, oh no, if I can't do this, I can't pay my rent, I won't be able to eat, I'm going to lose my car, I'm going to lose my job, I'm going to be homeless. And that's just all sitting at a desk doing your checkbook. You can see how
right.
your brain gets out of control and it runs rampant, telling this horrible story to you. And books like Turning Your Mind into an Ally teach you to control and be aware of when we are taking shots at ourselves. And I'm still not entirely sure why we do it. But if we can be aware of it and stop it, we can think productively.
Right.
Hope that makes sense.
It does. And I love that, right? Like turning your mind into your ally. It's a great title, and I'll have to look up that book. But really making sure that all the stories you're telling yourself to soothe or to get you through the day are really benefiting you, in more than just sort of making you feel okay about things that don't feel okay for you. I like that. So, Alex, do you think there's a difference or different advice that you would give to somebody that has maybe been in their job for a while, a couple of years, 5-6 years, and now they're feeling disillusioned, versus somebody that, is just sort of new to the job and maybe feels like maybe they didn't get the full picture? Is there a difference in how you would tell them to approach getting in a better situation?
Yeah, well, it's some of the same tools, but usually different reasons. A person who's been in their job 5 or 6 years who's dissatisfied, it could be a reorg in the company. It could be new management. It could be the company was purchased and now there are all new leaders. It could be that the work that I'm doing now, 5 or 6 years later, was great in year 1 or 2. The problem is it's the same work in year 5 or 6. And I had an expectation I'd be getting more money, more responsibility. It's the same thing. You have to unpack that disillusionment and find out what's really upsetting. In some cases, you might talk to people 5 or 6 years later, and they feel like, well, I'm in the same place, but you know what? I love my work. I'm disgruntled because society tells me I've got to get more responsibility, more money, and continually advance. And if I'm not doing that advancement, I need to be unhappy. And I actually do talk to some people who think they're unhappy. And by the time we're done talking, they go, you know what? I love what I do. This is great. Getting to that realization, again, some cockamamie story a person planted in their head, too much television, too many commercials, too much consumerism. It's got to be more, it's got to be bigger, it's got to be faster. People are getting the wrong messages. There is a quotation from Ralph Waldo Emerson, which says, "Nothing at last is sacred but the integrity of your own mind." And what that means to me is, as long as everything is peaceful in your head, you don't feel like the world is taking advantage of you, you're in a good place, you're fairly compensated, you work with decent people, you sleep well at night, you just can't put a price tag on that. And if a person wants to give that up so that they can travel every week to a new place in the world and not set down any roots anywhere, if that's something that is comfortable for them, great, do it. But if you know that travel more than once a quarter is going to upset your family, your wife, your kids, your dog, your friends, your family, if you know that's going to happen, you're stepping into that next role for all the wrong reasons. And if a person's thinking of making a move like that, they need to do the old pros and cons exercise, which is, older than me.
That's so interesting, the fact that you bring up some of this dissatisfaction or disillusionment could really be not with their current setting, but sort of the messages they feel they are hearing, right? I mean, that's a would be an interesting thing that as you're, unpacking that and really drilling into that to realize, no, I really like what I do and I like the people that I do it with. But there's some other story that's been told to me, or I think that, like you said, I should have gotten a promotion sooner or faster. I should be making more money at this point in my life. But if you can get okay with that, then, it's really more of a managing your emotions at that point, isn't it? To get your satisfaction.
Well, a man's 50 years old and his neighbor has a bigger house, going on vacations, driving a Porsche. He's driving a Toyota. It's very easy to look at a situation like that and say, what am I doing wrong? But again, another situation, you need to unpack it. You need to say, what's going well for me? Is my mind at rest? Am I in a good place? You could easily do an inventory of the two neighbors and find out the guy who looks like he's living the jet setter's life is miserable and he's not sleeping well and he doesn't like his job. It pays him a lot of money. Maybe his Porsche is in the shop every month. You just don't know. It's real easy for your brain to spin these stories and put us on the short end of the stick. So you need to be aware of when your mind is poking at you and take some steps. Again, awareness meditation is a great way to quiet your mind. It's funny that are park rangers who can look at the wind in the forest and tell you exactly what the weather is going to do, and they can take the steps to prepare for it. Awareness meditation is like learning, is literally focusing on your brain and how it's working, what you're thinking and why you're thinking it, so that when certain conditions come into your brain, you know what's going on. It's funny that people would spend so much time learning about the weather in the forest, but nobody thinks to examine how their brain functions.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I love this. So tell me a little bit more about what is awareness meditation? Like, how does one go about doing this?
There are different types of meditation. Some of the meditation is what people call blissing out. It's not the purpose of awareness meditation. Dana, if you can imagine a time when you've been going to, let's say you're going to go to a restaurant, and it's supposed to be a very nice restaurant, but maybe it's a little older and a little rough around the edges, and you go to the restaurant and you're noticing, the parking lot, the asphalt is coming up, and it's not as nice as you would have imagined for this restaurant. You go up the stairs, and the carpet's a little bit worn, and you get into the restaurant, and you had an expectation they would greet you, and you're being critical of that. And our minds are constantly sizing things up and judging them and correcting them. When you become aware of that, you can learn to stop your brain from continuously judging and sizing things up, so that you would just go to this restaurant. You would notice. You might notice that the parking lot has some rough spots in it. You might notice that there are some spots on the carpet, but you're not judging it. You're not saying to yourself, I think that's unacceptable. I won't come here again because of the way it looks or the way I was greeted. There's more allowing that takes place. But literally you're turning off that engine in your brain that is constantly judging and evaluating. And most people aren't even aware of it, so they start the awareness meditation, and it's funny when you see people later how they will sometimes refer to that activity as a frenetic brain activity. They're like, I can't stop it. I can't
Right.
shut it off. I'm looking for a peaceful and quiet place. Well, that peaceful and quiet place exists in your mind, but you have to practice. You have to exercise turning that function off. That makes sense?
It does. That's incredible to think about, right? Is being able to still have that awareness and notice things, but it's that judging or that, the worry behind those that you can turn off and progress forward for the better, I guess. That's a way to say that.
That's exactly right. And then when you're first practicing the awareness meditation, they say that when you start to become aware of your brain and how it goes unleashed and it is constantly churning, they say it's like a wild dog looking for meat. If you can imagine that, running all over, frantically hunting for some meat. That's how our brain operates. And when you get that, the early steps are to literally, when you are trying to clear your mind, you focus on your breath. You inhale and you exhale, and you focus on the breath until that's a comfortable exercise without your mind spinning out of control.
Right. I have that. Well, Alex, if, somebody's sitting there listening to this podcast today and they think, that the description of being frustrated and being disillusioned on the job really does describe me at this very moment. Is there one or two or three things you'd recommend that they could do right now or get started right now to improve their situation?
Sure. Start with a log. Start with a journal and journal how you're feeling every day and try to personally unpack as much as you can into the pages. Try to be honest with yourself when you're doing that. A second thing would be if you're at a company that does offer the opportunity for you to get some kind of coaching, take them up on it. That's a great way to go. A lot of counselors in the area. Sometimes companies have a program where they can get some counseling. That works very well also, because what you're looking for is a person to help you unpack the things you're thinking and feeling. So that's a great second step. Third, get some books on the topic. I think it all begins with self-awareness. That's not just on the end of the scale where you're struggling, but that's also on the end of the scale if you're an executive manager who is doing excellent work. It usually starts with a real keen sense of self-awareness. The best managers have it, usually along with some kind of an equanimity where they don't get too excited when things are great and they don't get too low when things go bad. So finding that place between a keen sense of self-awareness and equanimity can put you in a really good place. And usually those 3 steps can help you.
Wonderful. Well, Alex, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for discussing this with me. I'd love to move us into sort of the part of our podcast where we ask some questions of all of our guests. So, Alex, what was your first job?
My first job, I guess it would depend on how you define job. But I'll tell you 2 stories. One of them was my dad had a milk processing plant in Los Angeles, California. As a kid, I helped fill milk trucks with orders. And there was a cash and carry in the front of the dairy where people drove in with their car, and I took their orders, and I got their milk and eggs and cheese and bread, and I took their money and made change. So that was work for my dad. It was legitimate work, but I didn't have there was no paperwork involved. And the first job I had that involved paying taxes was a retail sales clerk at a department store in Bremerton, Washington.
Nice. So is there anything from those early jobs that you think you still carry with you and that you still use?
My working with my dad, every job I've ever done, including today, I do it with the sense of ownership that my dad had owning his own business. So, and anything I need to do that has to be done gets done. And that's so ingrained in me, I don't even have to try. From the retail sales, I really enjoy working with people. And so, and I like helping people. If you're a retail sales clerk, you're working with people and you're making people happy all day long by helping them find things they want and selling it to them. And that stayed with me as well.
I love that. I love how I can see that looking at you in your current role as a coach and that helping people and then that sense of ownership. So it's interesting for me to hear those first few jobs for you and even how I see that sort of reflecting in what you do today. That's incredible. So have you read or listened to anything lately that you would recommend to others?
You know, one of the great resources available to everybody are the online TED Talks. And I have a availability to a couple of meetings where those meetings end with a review of a TED Talk and then a discussion of the TED Talk. The one we had recently, I think they basically were conveying the message, any work with people is moral work, and it requires practical wisdom. In other words, incentives and hard-line guidelines aren't enough. They gave the example of in a hospital, the janitors, before they finish their shift, have to mop the floor. Janitor goes into a room where there's a cancer patient and the family's there, and we don't know how long this person is going to live. Well, if the janitor just used the guidelines, he would have said something, I'm sorry, you people have to go, or he would have mopped around them and ruined this moment that these people had with their family member who has cancer. But no, what the janitor did at the hospital at that point was decided to take a break, got a cup of coffee. When janitor came back, the family had finished having their discussion and then mopped the floor. So it's that kind of applied practical wisdom that is usually the difference between success and failure. And the same TED Talk was talking about the importance of character for young people and people of age. character being the most important thing a person can learn and carry into life. So I've got a nephew. He's really struggling right now. When I'm working with him, I'm trying to focus on getting his character straight. He's very young. I don't know how much longer I have, but if I can help him get a handle on some character issues, I won't need to be here to carry him forward. He can take care of himself. So those are just a few lessons from a recent TED Talk that we reviewed last week. I highly recommend. There's just a ton of value in the TED Talks.
Yeah, there is so much value in those TED Talks. I mean, so many great people, can get on stage there and share such valuable information, and then we can all benefit from it, right? Like that one-to-many kind of concept of the recording. So thank you for sharing that. I'll definitely try to look up that.
It's just like the career cue.
Exactly. Thank you for that plug, Alex. You're right. Nice. I'll pay you later.
Exactly.
So here's my last question, and maybe one of my favorites is, what would your 90-year-old self say to you? So if 90-year-old Alex walked in the door, what would he say to you?
Well, I have had an amazing career. The non-coaching achievements that I've had are things I never could have imagined growing up. I think I've discussed with you previously, owning all of Microsoft's treasury systems, managing $45 billion, having responsibility for the Microsoft career site, which at the time was it vacillated between the number one or number two amount of hits in the websites of the world. Those are huge achievements. So I know that my 90-year-old self would say, wow, you're an overachiever. But the secondary message there would probably be, and this comes from my ownership, I work too much and I work too hard, and I probably should have taken a little more time for myself and my family. So awesome career, total overachiever. But there was a cost. And for me, that cost is I missed out on some family events that were important, usually to help other people. Sometimes I just don't know when it's safe to turn the switch off.
God, I love that your 90-year-old self would, you're thinking that now, right? 90 is still a few years off for you, so many years off. So
yeah, what do you expect from a senile old man?
I love it. Well, Alex, this has been so great. Thank you so much for coming on the Career Q today and having this discussion. And I know our listeners will really value it. If our listeners want to learn more about you or possibly get in touch with you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
We are revamping our P17 website. I think you've probably either spoken to or you're going to speak to Peter Rogers. We'll get the P17 website set up. I will have email through that site, and that would probably be the best way to get a hold of me.
Great. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Alex. This has been a pleasure chatting with you today.
Great. Hope that helped. Thanks, Danna.
Thanks.
All right. Talk later. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to head on over to thecareerq.com where you can get more information, show notes, and related articles to today's topic. Also, if you like what you're hearing, head on over to iTunes, subscribe to the podcast, and make sure you leave us a rating and a review. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks again.
Career Q podcast is produced by Lens Group Media and recorded at Mohair Studios in Seattle's Queen Anne neighborhood.